Today I want to talk about all the important things I do before I start knitting a pattern. Simple little tricks that will ensure that you don't have to unravel your whole project 50 rows later. Mistakes happen, and as a beginner, even as an intermediate knitter, it can seem to be a daunting, sometimes even outright frustrating task to work with a pattern. But there are very easy steps you can implement into your knitting routine to avoid the most common mistakes and to ensure that your projects will be a success you can be proud of, and this video here is all about it. Number one, before you even purchase or download a pattern, read the description. Don't just look at the pretty pictures and say, yeah, that's something I want. Read the description. Does the pattern come in the size I need? What about the yarn? Is there a chart or written instructions? Is it for beginners or advanced knitters? Is it suitable for vision impaired knitters or whatever your need? Are there schematics, or is it only a recipe? Is there maybe even a video that goes along with it, like my basic sock pattern or my basic hat pattern here on YouTube? Does it sound like something you can work with? Or do you have a lot of question marks? And if you do, try to figure things out. Maybe even contact the designer or give this pattern a pass. There is nothing more frustrating than wanting to knit a garment but not being able to make sense of the instructions. And now you might go, well, Norman, that surely doesn't happen to you. To be quite honest with you, I tried to find myself through my share of historic knitting patterns from the 19th century, and I can assure you that there have been many occasions where I had to give up or continue with wild guesses. Number two, knit a swatch. The second thing I do before I start, I always knit a swatch for entirely different reasons than you might think. I mean, sure, knit it to get gauge. I have a video that focuses on that problem here on YouTube. I'll link it to you up in here. But there are actually so many other reasons why you should knit a swatch. Personally, I believe that getting gauge is an utter illusion there to frustrate generations of knitters, but I still knit a small swatch. First, a swatch like this one here is a good test run. You can use it to try out new stitches or rehearse stitches you might not have used in a long time. I mean, sure, mistakes can always be fixed, but the result might still be a little bit visible simply because you pulled out stitches, split the yarn, and so on. So maybe try out that brioche double decrease on a swatch first before you Google how to fix mistakes in brioche knitting. Also, once you're familiar with a pattern, you typically relax your tension. And especially with beginners, a project often starts with rather tight stitches, and then the further up you go, the fabric becomes looser and looser and wider, and this can be quite visible. So a swatch helps you to find your rhythm. Also, sometimes a pattern does not come with precise measurements, and a swatch will be able to help you figuring out your size as well. Multiply the cast on times your gauge, say 10 centimeters or 20 stitches, and you need to cast on 100 stitches for the hem of the front piece. Is 50 centimeters wide enough, or are your typical sweaters much wider at the hem than that? A swatch can also be used for washing and blocking experiments. Some dyes, especially red tones, are notorious for bleeding out. And if you knit stripes, say in red and white, and then you wash things, your white stripes might suddenly turn pinkish. Same applies to blocking. If you are unsure how to block your exotic silk, cotton, cashmere, whatever unicorn blend, use your swatch and try different methods and see what works best. And then it's also about yarn substitution. Often you cannot or you don't want to use the same yarn the designer used. And you make your own choices. Great. But only a good swatch that actually incorporates the colors, the stitches, and the general design elements of the pattern will be able to tell you if this works or not. Some yarns and patterns are match made in heaven, and others come directly from knitting hell. Your swatch will also be able to tell you if you can substitute stitches. So often I receive questions like this. Can I knit a lifted increase like KLL instead of make one right? Or vice versa. Can I use a tubular cast on instead of a German twisted cast on, and so on? Well, typically you can substitute about everything in a pattern, but only a swatch will be able to tell you if it works with the same kind of stitch count and you like the way it looks. I personally don't like the tubular cast on or binder or I-cords for that matter, but maybe you do, and your swatch will be able to tell you if it is a good choice. I stress on the I can't and won't tell you what you should prefer. There are so many other things you can do with a swatch that have nothing to do with getting gauge. Comment below if you want me to record a full video on all the secret little ways to use a swatch and how to avoid throwing them away later on. Number 3, read the full pattern. As a designer, I can tell you that probably 50% of all the questions I receive could have been answered by reading the full pattern or reading it one more time. Typically, there is a silly little mistake they have missed. And you know, it annoys me, it annoys you, it annoys everyone. Only a couple of weeks ago, a lady that also comes to the knitting meetup I go every Wednesday started knitting a Stephen West shawl. And you know, she thought it looked kind of weird, only to realize that she started with the instructions for the swatch instead of the actual shawl. So, I specifically want you to put check marks behind the following list. A. Do you have all the materials and tools? Maybe a crochet hook, a stitch holder, or a spare needle is required. But especially make sure that you have enough yarn and there is a, 10% margin. Too many knitters lost yarn chicken or wished they would have had some spare yarn left to darn a hole later on, or add a little bit of fabric to the hem or the cuffs later on because it ended up being too short. You can insert a lifeline, unravel from the bottom and then knit in the other direction, and that's possible, but only if you have some yarn left. B. Do you know all techniques and abbreviations used in the pattern? If not, look them up and test them on a swatch. I have a free glossary and an extensive knitting stitch library available on my blog. There is my second YouTube channel with tutorials for almost all basic and not so basic knitting techniques. Use these resources to look things up. Because when you are knitting a lace shawl with a slippery yarn and 150 stitches on your needles, mid-row might not be the best time to look up what POSSO1TBLC2F means or something like that. C. Next. Double check the size and measurements. A good pattern will come with measurements. Size M is anything but a universal fact. A US size M will be very different from, say, a Japanese size M. And a male size M is something entirely different yet. And of course, some designers may use the term M a little bit more loosely than big clothing brands. Pick one of your favorite sweaters, cardigans, or whatever you intend to knit with a similar construction, measure it, and then try to compare things. And lastly, ask yourself, do I understand the basic construction? And I do feel this last item on the list is the most important. Experienced knitters and beginners have one thing in common. They are very likely to make their own changes, either because they don't know any better or because they think they know better. Now, I do believe that knitting is all about expressing your creativity and making your individual choices, rather than repeating what everyone else does. But if you pick a different selvage stitch and later on you need to pick up stitches or seam things together for a very specific look and feel, then your small changes might mean that you have to unravel things, or in the best scenario it looks a little bit wonky, or you pick a different knitting stitch pattern, say ribbings instead of stockinette stitch, and then things don't align with the decreases, or you add color work where none was before, and then you don't know how to get a nice transition when you attach the arms, and so on. Now, of course, if you are knitting a dishcloth, that hardly matters, but seamed sweaters, toys, baby shoes, gloves can have quite complicated constructions where you have to seam multiple little pieces together, pick up stitches, and so on. So try to figure out where which part goes before you cast on. And this will also help you with fixing mistakes. Then you can go, well, doesn't matter, I can hide this in the seam later on, or it's gonna be on the back side anyway, or this will be very visible, it will be in the center of attention. I rather try to fix this properly. Number 4, check for updates and errata. The next thing I almost always do is I log into Ravelry or I check out the website of the respective designer. Patterns can be super complicated to create and mistakes happen. We are all just humans. I mean, you have a tech editor, 5 test knitters, you reread your own pattern 20 times, knit 3 samples, and sometimes there's still a minor mistake or even a major mistake that escaped all these experienced knitters. And then a good designer will publish these errata, so you don't have to run into the same mistake again. Now, typically a pattern gets an update whenever there is such a major mistake. But you know how things are, you buy a pattern and only get to knit it a year later. So you might actually have an old version, and especially if it's not a digital pattern but from a book or a magazine. And it works the other way around as well. So often I get emails saying, well, there's a mistake, this doesn't work out at all. But often it turns out that they simply did not read the pattern correctly. So if 100 people knitted this pattern and added projects on Ravelry and none of them complained, well, this might be a first inkling, not a guarantee, but a first inkling that this is actually a user error. And even if there are no mistakes, this is still a good choice. Projects from other knitters might also give you some inspiration. Say you are a plus size with a big bust, and maybe one of the big previous knitters on Ravelry has a similar body and they documented their changes in a project. And then you can implement these changes as well, maybe even write them a little message, or use this as inspiration, or simply as a confirmation that this pattern actually works for plus sizes. Just because a pattern comes with instructions for 2XL doesn't mean it will end up looking good simply because they forgot to scale, I don't know, the cable pattern in the middle, and then you end up with a big sweater with tiny little cables in the middle or a tiny little section of color work, and that often can look a little bit weird. And another thing you may do, a lot of famous patterns have their own hashtags, and some on Instagram, and some even have or had knit-alongs. So research so you don't have to repeat the mistakes others made for you. It's also about yarn. So I deeply value everything Stephen West did for the knitting community. mostly his designs are a little bit too busy for my personal liking. And if you see the official pictures, I typically, well, it's nothing I want to knit. But sometimes when I see pictures of finished Stephen Westschalls on Instagram, Ravelry, Reddit, or Facebook, or wherever else, I stumble across an ingenious yarn color combination that makes me want to knit that despite my initial misgivings. And I go like, wow, this is great. We are all different. We all like different things, and at the end of the day, a pattern is just a vessel for your creativity. But your horizon is limited by the things you already know, and the more things you know, the more things you see, the more material there is for your creativity to work with. So checking out projects by other knitters on Ravelry is such a smart choice. It really helps you to avoid these situations where you finished a project and feel like, I should have picked a different yarn or color, and then you never end up wearing that item because you don't really like it. The same can be done on Etsy. People do upload pictures and reviews as well, and all these little bits and pieces can inspire you, verify that these patterns work, and ultimately show you what to expect when a non-professional knitter knits these patterns. Number 5, compare pattern pictures with the chart or the written instructions. So the last thing I always do is I look at the pictures. A good pattern comes with multiple pictures of the finished item, and most patterns also come with a chart. And here's what often happens. The instructions in the chart and the written instructions, they don't align, or a pattern gets translated. Typically, this means the actual chart, not the legend, but the actual chart remains the same. However, often the translations don't get tech edited one more time, and often they are translated by passionate fans and not professional knitting translators. So sometimes mistakes, and sometimes even major mistakes, creep in. Now, of course, you probably don't want to compare every single little box of the chart with the written instructions. Still, you can kind of sweep across it once and draw some samples and check if it makes sense. And you can also look at the pictures and try to do the same. Do they match? If it's a new pattern that has been tech edited and test knitted by, a famous designer, it's very, very rare that they differ. But if it's a free pattern, maybe even a second-hand pattern, or from an inexperienced designer or a new designer, or a vintage pattern, I do feel this is rather important. The digital age and the rising popularity of knitting as a craft in the past 2 decades thankfully changed the way instructions and patterns are written dramatically, especially as these days most people don't learn knitting at a girls' school anymore. So in old patterns, instructions are often split between a chart and written instructions, and these two things are not redundant. In very old patterns typically assume a lot of knowledge and things even a present-day intermediate knitter will have problems with. Things like, why would we have to tell you that you need to knit the hem in a 2x2 rib stitch and start with a German twisted cast on? Of course, that's obvious. It just says knit a hem for 5 centimeters, and then the pictures might be able to fill in the gaps, or the schematics. And again, this process will help you to understand the basic construction of the pattern a little bit better. And once you understand everything, you are ready to start. And trust me, this video will probably be 20 minutes long or so, but this whole process, excluding knitting the swatch, will barely take that much time, and these easy steps can, however, save you so much time unraveling and fixing mistakes and regretting your choices later on. So I do feel it's well worth your time. Anyway, that was my video and things I do before I start every knitting pattern. Just common sense and no rocket science, really. So like this video if you enjoyed watching, comment with your suggestions and feedback, and of course don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.